Welcome back to the Bulletin Desk, bringing you the latest news from around the world. On September 14, 2025, Washington, D.C. awoke to an unusual stillness. The city, so often defined by its relentless pace and constant hum of activity, seemed to pause. The air was thick with anticipation, as if everyone sensed that history was about to be made. Even the early morning sun, rising over the monuments and government buildings, seemed to cast a more somber light than usual, illuminating empty streets that would soon fill with anxious citizens and reporters. The city's attention was riveted on the Supreme Court, where a decision loomed that would reshape America's economic future. All eyes, from the corridors of power to the quiet corners of coffee shops, were fixed on the imposing marble building. The steps of the court were crowded with journalists, legal experts, and ordinary citizens, all waiting for a ruling that could alter the course of the nation. The sense of suspense was palpable, as if the entire city was collectively holding its breath, waiting for the first sign of news. The case at hand challenged President Trump's sweeping global tariffs, a policy that had divided the nation and redefined U.S. trade. These tariffs, imposed on goods from around the world, had sparked fierce debate in Congress, on cable news, and at kitchen tables across America. Supporters argued they protected American jobs and industries, while critics warned of rising prices and strained international relationships. The stakes were enormous, not just for politicians and business leaders, but for workers, families, and consumers everywhere. As 10 a.m. approached, the city held its breath, phones in hand, nerves taut. In offices, on sidewalks, and in living rooms, people refreshed news feeds and waited for alerts. The tension was almost tangible, a shared anxiety that stretched from the heart of Washington to communities across the country. For many, the outcome would mean the difference between economic hardship and relief, between uncertainty and a new sense of direction. The verdict arrived, after months of legal arguments and public debate. In a landmark 6-3 decision, the court struck down the tariffs. The justice's ruling was clear: the sweeping trade restrictions exceeded the executive's authority. As the news broke, a wave of emotion swept through the crowd outside the court and across the nation. Some cheered, others stood in stunned silence, and many immediately began to wonder what would come next for the American economy. The silence broke into a storm of reaction. The balance of power in Washington had shifted. Lawmakers rushed to issue statements, business leaders scrambled to assess the impact, and families discussed what the decision might mean for their own lives. The ruling sent shockwaves through the political establishment, forcing both parties to reconsider their strategies and priorities. For some, it was a moment of vindication; for others, a call to action. The implications would ripple far beyond the marble steps, touching lives across the country and the world. Global markets reacted instantly, with stocks surging and falling as investors recalibrated. At ports and factories, workers wondered how the changes would affect their jobs. In homes from coast to coast, families watched the news, aware that a single decision in Washington could shape their futures. The city's stillness had given way to a new era of uncertainty and possibility, as America and the world waited to see what would happen next. The Supreme Court's decision wasn't just legal theory; it hit home for millions. For some, tariffs had protected jobs and revived local factories. For others, they meant higher costs and lost markets. Small businesses struggled with soaring prices, while farmers faced closed export doors and mounting debt. Consumers felt the pinch at the checkout as everyday goods grew more expensive. The ruling forced a national reckoning. Who should bear the cost of America's trade strategy? The answer would shape the nation's economic future for years to come. When Donald Trump took office, he made it clear that his administration would take a radically different approach to global trade. Trump's tariffs quickly became the cornerstone of his America First agenda, signaling a new era of economic nationalism. The president argued that for too long, the United States had been taken advantage of by foreign competitors, and he promised to put American workers and industries first, no matter the cost. The administration's goal was ambitious: to revive U.S. manufacturing, bring back lost jobs, and curb the nation's persistent trade deficits. Factories that had once been shuttered were suddenly in the spotlight, as the White House promised a manufacturing renaissance. Supporters hoped these tariffs would level the playing field for American workers, making it easier for domestic companies to compete against cheaper imports. Invoking rarely used emergency powers, the Trump administration imposed sweeping tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods. The average tariff rate soared to levels not seen in generations, affecting everything from steel and aluminum to everyday consumer products. These measures were justified as necessary for national security, but critics argued they were a blunt instrument, risking unintended consequences across the economy. In the short term, some industries like steel and aluminum did see a boost. Factories ramped up production, and workers in those sectors felt a renewed sense of optimism. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the tariffs might deliver on their promise to restore American industry. But the reality was far more complicated. Most manufacturers and farmers soon found themselves squeezed by higher costs for raw materials and retaliatory tariffs from trading partners. American agricultural exports plummeted as foreign markets closed their doors, and many small businesses struggled to absorb the sudden spike in expenses. The trade war sowed deep uncertainty throughout the global economy. Supply chains that had taken decades to build were thrown into chaos, with companies scrambling to find new suppliers or relocate production. International alliances were strained as long-standing partners questioned America's commitment to free trade and open markets. Legally, the policy's foundation was shaky at best. The administration relied on emergency powers originally intended for national defense, not for sweeping economic action. This unprecedented use of executive authority sparked fierce debate in Congress and among legal scholars, who questioned whether the president had overstepped constitutional limits. The resulting conflict set the stage for a historic Supreme Court showdown. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, while legal experts pored over decades-old statutes searching for answers. The nation's attention turned to the justices, who would soon decide the fate of the president's sweeping trade powers. As the case unfolded, Americans from all walks of life anxiously awaited a final judgment, one that would not only determine the limits of executive power, but also shape the future of U.S. trade policy for years to come. The legal battle that would eventually reach the highest court in the land didn't begin in the halls of Congress or with powerful lobbyists. Instead, it started on the ground, with the everyday struggles of small businesses across America, people who poured their lives into their work, only to find themselves suddenly threatened by sweeping government action. Among them was a family-owned toy company, a business that had been a staple in its community for generations. The owners, like so many others, watched in disbelief as tariffs were imposed overnight, sending shockwaves through their supply chains and making it nearly impossible to keep their doors open. Their story was echoed by countless other small businesses, each facing mounting costs and uncertainty about the future. These businesses, crippled by tariffs, decided to fight back. They argued that the president had overstepped constitutional boundaries, using emergency powers to bypass Congress's exclusive authority over trade policy. The legal battle was grueling and uncertain. Lower courts issued conflicting rulings, leaving business owners in limbo as the economic pain deepened. But as more stories of hardship emerged and public pressure mounted, the case gained national attention. In August 2025, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals delivered a landmark decision, declaring that the president lacked clear legal authority to impose such sweeping tariffs without explicit congressional approval. The government, unwilling to accept defeat, immediately appealed, and the Supreme Court agreed to fast-track the case, recognizing its enormous implications for the balance of power. When the Supreme Court finally issued its 6-3 decision, it invoked the major questions doctrine, a principle that says only Congress can authorize major changes to the nation's economic landscape. The justices made it clear, the Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to make such consequential decisions. The ruling marked the end of a long and difficult legal journey, restoring constitutional order and reaffirming the role of small businesses in shaping American democracy. It all began with one company's fight for survival, a reminder that even the smallest voices can spark change at the highest levels. The Supreme Court's decision was about more than tariffs. It was a defense of the Constitution's separation of powers. The founders gave Congress, not the president, the authority to regulate commerce and levy taxes. The tariff policy, enacted without congressional approval, challenged this balance. The court's ruling checked executive overreach, insisting that major economic changes require clear legislative backing. Congress must now reclaim its role in trade policy through debate and lawmaking. The decision reaffirmed that big national shifts demand democratic process, not unilateral action. It was a victory for constitutional order and American democracy. The end of the tariffs will bring real changes to Americans' wallets and workplaces. Consumers can expect lower prices as import costs fall, easing household budgets. Businesses reliant on global supply chains will see costs drop, spurring investment and stability. But for industries once shielded by tariffs like steel and aluminum, the competition will intensify, risking job losses. The government faces a logistical challenge, refunding billions in tariffs and managing the transition. The economic story isn't over. The process of unwinding the tariffs is just beginning. For many, the ruling is relief. For others, it's a new challenge. The ripple effects will be felt for years. The Supreme Court's decision sent shockwaves through global markets and governments. Allies welcomed the move, hoping for renewed cooperation and the end of retaliatory tariffs. U.S. exporters, especially farmers, stand to regain lost markets. China's response was cautious. Tariffs may be gone, but deeper tensions remain. The ruling bolsters the case for a rules-based international order, encouraging negotiation over confrontation. The World Trade Organization saw hope for renewed multilateralism. The world watched as America reaffirmed its constitutional principles. A new era of global trade may be dawning, but challenges persist. With tariffs gone, the U.S. faces both opportunity and risk. There's a chance to rebuild alliances and boost exports, fueling growth and innovation. Lower costs could mean more jobs and higher wages in competitive sectors. But industries once protected must adapt, and workers may need support and retraining. Some trade war changes, like altered supply chains, may be permanent. The nation must heal divisions and restore trust at home and abroad. Navigating this new era will require vision, cooperation, and resilience. The Supreme Court's ruling is a testament to the strength of America's constitutional framework. It returns trade policy to Congress, demanding debate, compromise, and legislation. The challenge balancing workers, consumers, and businesses' interests in a global economy. The story began with ordinary citizens demanding accountability and proved the power of civic engagement. The future depends on an informed, active public and leaders who respect the rule of law. America's path forward will be complex, but the Constitution remains its compass. The nation's future will be built on law, not on the whims of power.